Good evening, good afternoon. Patrick Lovell coming to you, stardate August 6th, 2022, and delivering yet another truth bomb. And man, what a time it is to be delivering truth bombs. Holy shit, the world's gone mad, and I can't wait to unpack this for you today. Sometimes I kind of think about, this being, an exercise like, Scully in the wonderful film Avatar, and who might see these things and when and how they might resonate. I continue to see big numbers, and hopefully bigger numbers will discover this now and be able to interpret what it is that I'm saying. But you never know how this whole thing's going to go down, and I swear to God, our country is in some precarious times. And what do you think about this Alex Jones trial? Have you been paying attention? I have. A lot of just unbelievable nuclear revelations coming out of this that have a lot of touchstones to some very important matters. But let's just start with kind of, I think, some of the biggest shocking aspects of this for me so far, specifically as it relates to how much Alex Jones is worth. So, for example, I, kind of thought he was pretty goddamn successful, to be honest with you, and I figured maybe he was worth 100 million, maybe 200 million tops. But based on the testimony of this expert witness, who is an economist, but he's also some sort of forensic analyst that is able to create all the ins and outs of valuations for companies, both private and public. And I mean, this guy's worked on everything in recent memory. At least this is the boxes that they checked off. But literally, the Koch brothers, my God, Koch Industries, as well as Berkshire Hathaway, which is Warren Buffett's company, and DuPont, which is one of the biggest companies in the history of the United States and one of the most fabulously wealthy families, the DuPonts, of course, but it's public, and it's been in existence for a very long time. And so they hired this gentleman to look into all of the myriad of different enterprises or LLCs and shell companies that Alex Jones was engaged in. And as he started to pull back kind of the numbers and the figures of how this whole thing played out, he started to reveal that Alex Jones was making somewhere between $50 and $70 million a year for the past decade. When I heard that figure, I was fucking shocked. And I wasn't shocked. Maybe I was shocked at the revelation of what took place, I think, on Thursday, where he was hit for compensatory damages in the amount of $4 million, for the first family of these Sandy Hook trials. And then it was announced yesterday that he was hit with another $45.2 million in punitive damages. Now, the whole thing surrounds this scenario that Alex Jones was engaged in this conspiracy that the government was using the Sandy Hook situation as a false flag scenario to basically come for everybody's guns. And it was just unbelievably horrific to take the situation of these parents who had lost their children in such a tragic, unbelievably ungodly manner, where this teenage punk shows up with this military grade arsenal and starts mowing down children and everything that is. I mean, we're talking. I can't even imagine the evil, the horror of the whole thing. And then, of course, Alex Jones starts in on, well, it was fake. It was a false flag operation. Yesterday, after 12 years, the guy admits on the stand that, Your Honor, I now understand this is real. What? Okay, thanks, Alex. A little too late. But the damage that was caused by Alex Jones to these families was these crazy people in society listen to what Alex is saying, believe him, and then start terrorizing these families, calling and harassing them on their telephones, online, showing up in their lives, and blaming them or accusing them of faking this and being actors. Imagine, put yourself in their shoes. I'm sorry, if you're somebody who believes that what Alex Jones was saying, and that you can't understand how ungodly evil something like that would be, please move on. I don't want to connect with you. For everybody else, it's just the trauma, the insanity of it all is just gross and beyond comprehension. And I'm glad to see this happen. But it's a little too late. It doesn't bring back the children. Okay, big rewards. That's great. Hopefully, it will bring some modicum of justice in some way, shape, or form. But there's bigger things at play as a result of all of this. And I guess I have to comment on this first and foremost because this was like probably the most obvious but mind blowing of it all to me. So I started listening to this testimony of Alex Jones on the stand, and the attorney was asking him, well, how many hours do you commit a day to InfoWars? And Alex Jones said, roughly 4 hours a day of recording time. And then they record 6 days a week, right? And so then the attorney asked him, well, how much time do you, put into research and understanding the topics that you discuss? And Alex Jones is like, yeah, maybe 2 hours a day. I about fell out of my fucking chair. I mean, here's this guy who didn't graduate from college, who wanted to be, like a radio personality, from the era of the 80s and the 90s. Guys he quoted are like Larry King being influential to him, as well as Stern, Howard Stern, and you could see how he or anyone could want to aspire to something like that. But Alex Jones became this guy, who started to find that people were responding to his kind of bombacity, his personality, his strange humor, all of those things, and everything that he started to, be in terms of, and I think he got to start, quite frankly, in somewhat of a legitimate arena. So, Alex Jones back in the early 2000s were questioning the Bush administration and WMDs. And he got a lot of attention for that. And he started going to protests. And he was like, wait a second, there's no weapons of mass destruction in Iraq. And then he started to ask questions about 9/11. I don't know how much he got wrong or right about 9/11, but he was always curious and he was asking questions. But he was no journalist and he was no expert by any stretch. In fact, he was a fucking Nimrod looking into stuff about 2 hours a day, responding and acting and just blowing bullshit all fucking day. And he's making $50 million a year for fucking bullshit. Now, someone who's just switching the channel and coming to, see me for the first time on TikTok or, Twitter or whatever, without any context to who I am and everything else, they'd probably just automatically assume, hey, there's another bombastic blowhard like Alex Jones. And, who the fuck is this guy? Meanwhile, I've spent maybe tens of thousands of hours, maybe 100,000 hours. I've actually never done the math on how much did I put into this over the last 13 years to become the foremost expert in what it is that I'm delivering these truth bombs to you about. Meanwhile, we can't fucking get maybe 0.01% of the people that were absolutely destroyed by what is the subject of my expertise, which is the con, www.thecon.tv, which is the full story of the largest criminal conspiracy and cover-up in history that never ended. Primarily about the 2008 great financial crisis and what happened and what didn't happen in the aftermath. But getting back to Alex Jones, the media, the mainstream media, is now at this, like, let's call it level 10 of arrogance in a sense. That it's like, look, America, we told you. Guys like Alex Jones, and then obviously the inference of somebody like Joe Rogan and all of the stuff that came out of the ivermectin and the COVID scenario and everything that took place at that level. The real discussion is twofold. The first is, okay, if you lie, and if you're a liar, and if you start to create conspiracy theories and you're yelling, fire in a movie theater, that sort of thing, it's no longer free speech. You're creating cause and effect in the very scenario that Alex Jones did to the families of the Sandy Hook massacre. So you're liable and you're going to go down. That's the first message. The second message is that, mainstream gets it right. And so they've got credibility suddenly. And this is kind of against, the last several years of, going back to 2016, especially when Donald Trump started talking about fake media, because he was blowing holes in the credibility of media because they deserve to have holes blown in them infinitum, and I'm just about to do that. But at the same time, what it gave rise to was a lot of people in the arena, both online, in the blogosphere, and whatever the case is, basically chiming in because nobody would trust media. So it leads to these things like fomenting, Alex Jones and everything that, he encompassed in the Sandy Hook scenario. But, it was interesting to come full circle with Alex Jones in his testimony. He said, he was asked, whether or not he's still pursuing these types of stories, and he literally said, no, I'm backing off. It's too dangerous. It's too, it's too controversial and those types of things. And he starts to go into, this sort of segue, which is I was putting my finger in the air and taking a temperature read of which way the wind was blowing, because this I think is so Alex Jones and everything that somebody like Trump and the whole right's all about. He said, I'm actually getting into philosophy and spirituality and Christianity. But don't forget, Alex Jones was really on the front lines of the January 6th insurrection and in talking incessantly in advance about all of the things that would echo everything that Trump was and Q and all of those types of things at that time period to really give, some sort of like, gasoline on the fire about whether or not it was, a legitimate election, right? So you plant all these seeds, you foment all of this distrust in the actual institutions, specifically media and government, because both of which have failed completely, and they are fake news, and they are full of shit in every direction there is imaginable. But yet, the response is a guy like Alex Jones who like literally looks into something 2 hours a day and doesn't know fucking shit and makes $50 to $70 million a year. So kudos to the families of Sandy Hook, and hopefully they take him down for 100 million more. And if he says, Alex Jones said like, I'm only worth 5 million liquid. Yeah, go fuck yourself, Alex. I hope that they fucking seize his assets, they fucking bankrupt his ass. But the next thing about all of that is that, and this is as beguiling and disgusting, but it's also the purpose of the goddamn mainstream media, is that they found that there were, these text messages for the last 3 years that Alex Jones's attorneys handed over to the Sandy Hook attorneys, and now suddenly the January 6th committee is investigating what's on those texts, because we know that Alex Jones was up to his eyeballs in it, and he was fermenting the whole thing on his show and Infowars and everything else that led to the January 6th insurrection. But it's going to be interesting to see what kind of information they get from those texts. But at the same time, it also exposes what I think is the disgusting, the beguiling nature of media, because it's like, okay, let's not even talk about who these families are and what happened to them in this incredible terrorized situation that Alex Jones created. Let's just hop right into whether or not he's going to get busted further for January 6th. Okay, why is that relevant and important? Because the mainstream media, if it's CNN or MSNBC or NY Times or all of these others, they're targeting Trump in a big way. They're ready to take Trump down. Like Trump was the mastermind of this whole thing. Now, Trump is completely fucking guilty. He's completely guilty of everything that they've said he's guilty of, and defrauding the United States and everything else. We would know this stuff infinitum, going back to the goddamn the impeachment, and the guy lied about 5,000 times. By the time he was halfway through his presidency, I mean, it was just disgusting that a guy like Donald Trump could ever become president. Not to mention the decades before of all the crime that he could have been put in prison for, all sorts of crimes, from financial crimes and control fraud and money laundering and tax evasion and everything else that he's been doing for literally decades, and yet he became the president of the United States. Well, how is that possible? Well, it's because of everything that I keep laying on you in these truth bombs and what I am an expert in, where I've spent tens of thousands of hours getting all of the details and the information that put this whole thing together. The government failed. The institutions of this country, from the FBI and the DOJ, failed to rein in the largest criminal conspiracy and cover-up in history, which Wall Street perpetuated. Through everything that we show you in www.thecon.tv, which blew up at least 50 million Americans, okay? Both homeowners and pensioners, and then people all around the world, all based on a criminal pipeline that we unpack in the con. That is the largest RICO, racketeering, influenced, corrupt organization situation in the history of the world. This makes the mob look tiny. That's what I've done. I'll say right here. I mean, you've heard me before be very critical of Rachel Maddow and Tucker Carlson and Anderson Cooper. I mean, Tucker Carlson has shown on occasion that he can be pretty, clever. He's a fucking asshole beyond comprehension, but yet he's also pretty good in some ways, and he's pretty smart. But yet, his job is to make sure that he lies to you with the brand that's going to appeal to conservatives. Okay, they hate liberals. They want a patriarchy. We want these specific laws. We supposedly want all sorts of freedom, but then we want to tell everybody what to do. And then we supposedly want all sorts of liberty, but then we want to lock everybody up. And then we definitely, want all of the freedom for ourselves to control everybody else. I mean, that's really what it comes down to. And Tucker Carlson is basically a schwarmy son of a bitch. And the guy's probably paid 11 million, maybe more a year, to basically lie and piss on everybody's heads, telling him it's rain on that side of the fence. I'd say it to his face. I'd say it on a show if he ever had the balls to welcome me on, because boy, would I love to go toe to toe with that guy. I mean, like I've said before, he reminds me of Leonardo DiCaprio in Django. Not a great character, although Leonardo played him brilliantly. But then you've got Rachel Maddow. Rachel fucking Maddow. She has proved time and again that she is incredibly intelligent. She's got the resources to lay out fantastic cases, and she could have been a great prosecutor, right? But she also proves what she's cherry picking over and over and over. Her job, her one undeniable job, is to be the communications director for the Democratic Party and to go after Trump and all things that Trump represents, right? So, she gets a lot right about Trump. There's no question. And then some, and it surprises me sometimes. But then the whole Russiagate thing, I mean, she kind of can't see the forest through the trees sometimes, because her entire job is to make sure that we hate Trump. And she ends up getting paid $30 million a year for it. Okay? $30 million a year to make sure that, okay, if we're going to compare the monstrosity of Trump to what it is that I continue to tell you, he's at best a mid-level player. Okay? Remember the tiny hands? All that kind of stuff. I mean, I could go on days busting his chops. The bottom line is Trump is a fucking joke. He's a moron. The guy couldn't tie his shoes together. He's not a mastermind of anything. He's a guy who inherited a lot of money, knew how to manipulate people, plays this bombastic guy. Sometimes he surprises me with a swarminess, and sometimes he's kind of funny. But most of the time, I want to see him get his comeuppance. Okay, and he's guilty, and he's guilty of so much. And I don't know what the hell's going on in the Southern District of Manhattan, or quite frankly, the AG of New York, both of which that I know have got major investigations, or they did. I think the guy at the Southern SDNY dropped it because of political concerns. Who knows? But again, that takes us back to the DOJ, because the DOJ could have fragged Donald Trump a long time ago, but they're dragging their feet. Why? Because political calculus? The DOJ is there to administer the law. They're the highest freaking investigator and prosecutor in the land. Okay? And then we've got Supreme Court that could question certain things, but they work in cahoots most of the time. And the power of the Department of Justice, again, like I told you in a truth bomb a couple of days ago, is compared to you and me as individuals, absolutely humongous, beyond comprehension, like a pebble of sand on a beach somewhere compared to the sun. But then, compared to the white shoe law firms and all of these other apparatuses that have completely hijacked the United States, that is the financial system that I personally have gone the distance to reveal, and the only person willing to do it, and the only person capable of doing it, and the only person that actually had the tenacity and the truth to actually do it on behalf of tens of millions of people, the power of all of those firms on Wall Street and their law firms, compared to the DOJ, they're like the largest sun in the galaxy that you could fit like 5 billion suns into. I mean, it's remarkable how huge they are. So what we find at the end of this sort of like this roadmap, right, is that mainstream wants to fucking destroy Alex Jones for the stuff that he should be destroyed for. But the way they want to do it is like a high schooler who, or even, let's use like a fraternity, right? Like a bunch of frat guys that raped some chick on a roofie, and they've got absolutely no morals, and they're disgusting, and they did lines on her, and then they wrote on her, and then they threw her in a garbage bag and everything else. It's like those types of guys, right? But they didn't get busted. And so they're fucking pointing at, the small house down the street of the fucking loudmouth that's an idiot. And they're just kind of standing there going, hey, look at everybody, look at that asshole. He needs to be taken down. And they can take like a higher moral principle because they've got a bunch of, women or black people or this or that, that are actually all saying the same thing. Meanwhile, they don't do anything. They're not journalists. They're as much a journalist as freaking, as Alex Jones. And I should say that most of these, investigators at the DOJ and some of these law firms and everything else, they they didn't investigate. They didn't investigate what it is that we had to. That led us not only to, all of the victims. Like I traveled this country 9 times, thousands upon thousands of miles, getting people at every level of the story. Okay, I got people that were victims of illegal foreclosures from California to Florida and everywhere in between, and their stories always line up and they have the same elements, first and foremost. I talked to brokers that told me exactly how they did it. I got testimony from the Federal Crisis and Inquiry Commission of exactly how brokers would basically set people, set borrowers up to create liar's loans, which were criminal. These aren't subprime. What happened, in the aftermath of the foreclosure crisis, because media is so stupid, they kept identifying subprime as the reason we blow up, and they all started acting like they know what they're talking about. None of them investigated what the fuck happened. We're talking about liar's loans created this whole madness, which were then fermented because of the whole thing that we lay out in the con, www.thecon.tv, which I interviewed. I got like thousands of appraisers down in Texas from all over the country that told us the same thing of how it worked and how lenders forced them to do certain things under certain circumstances because they were getting trillions of dollars from Wall Street. And everybody was incentivized to lie, steal, and cheat to make sure that they pumped into the global economy shit that was going to blow up. And then they knew it was going to blow up. And the likes of Goldman Sachs decided to short it. And we saw that in the movie The Big Short, but it was only a tiny bit of what actually took place. And then after all of this stuff took place, the real story is that we had the former Secretary of the Treasury, Hank Paulson, meet with the chair of the Federal Reserve at that time, Ben Bernanke, and then the head of the Bank of New York Federal Reserve, which was Timothy Geithner. They had a backdoor meeting. Actually, it was Hank Paulson primarily. He was the only one there on this particular meeting. They met with the top 13 bankers of the largest financial banks in the United States, financial players in the United States, behind closed doors, and Hank Paulson presented a 3-page paper that basically told all the banks that were like, look, I'm going to pull out the bazooka. I'm going to pay you to get you guys whole, and you're going to do exactly what I tell you. That happened before Obama became president, by the way. Then Obama gets ushered in, and Obama, Mr. Change we can believe in, who's as smart as they get, constitutional law expert out of Harvard, gazillions of times smarter than I am, but he played ball. Here he was supposed to ride this populist wave to usher in kind of an FDR moment, and instead, he ended up putting all the people that engineered the madness that blew up the world in to clean it up. Larry Summers, all the guys that basically were there the whole time back to Clinton, quite frankly. And so when we're talking compare and contrast, for example, like these epiphanies that mainstream is having about, what Alex Jones did in terms of terrorizing these people from Sandy Hook, to make this grandiose case that, now we're the ones that are credible. I want you to understand that they all ignored everything that I'm telling you. And that's why I had to go on this infinite journey to go get the truth. And I am doing it every single day because, looking through the confluence of somebody like Alex Jones, who could get paid $50 to $70 million a year for all the buffoonery that he does. And then somebody like, Rachel Maddow, who is as smart as she is, to present obfuscation and lies to distort and deceive everybody from making sure that she's covering for Obama. That's what she did. She gets paid $30 million a year. Yours truly, for presenting the truth that affected 50 million people, at least in the United States, that led to a $29 trillion getaway, and nobody went to prison. That led to another $30 trillion since. Me, who's got all of those answers, I'm not worth a dime. I lost everything in the process. I got a project worth millions of dollars that the system won't let through because it exposes them. And that is really where I want to end this whole truth bomb tonight. So all of the people that go to people like Alex Jones or quite frankly, Joe Rogan or whomever else, they're looking for answers, right? They're looking for answers that they can't get from the mainstream because they know they can't trust the mainstream. And good for you for not trusting the mainstream. The mainstream cannot be trusted. They played ball with the power the entire time to cover up what it is that I'm telling you. But most of you guys are looking for a boogeyman. And this is the whole thing, right? So Alex Jones is looking for the boogeyman, and he makes it out to be the government that's basically coming after your guns, which was just a fucking contorted lie mess that has nothing to do with the power. It was just something that he could actually prey upon, people who are gun right fanatics to say they're going to come fucking take your guns. And it worked. And he made hundreds of millions of dollars. And now he's going to fucking get, blitzkrieg for that. Okay? But then you got, Rachel Maddow and Anderson Cooper and Tucker Carlson making millions upon millions of dollars parsing out these things that I've told you before. They're not journalists. They've literally said in courts in the last 6 months that you can't consider them journalists. This is their own attorneys. They're entertainment. They're not bringing you the fucking facts. You can't hold them to a standard of liability because they lie. And then ultimately, the boogeyman. Well, yeah, there is a boogeyman behind the scenes. Do you know who the boogeyman is? I do. I mean, there's a whole lot of them, but there's one in particular that I should try to paint this picture of to close this out here tonight. So, who is the man behind the curtain that's pulling all the strings, pushing all the buttons? His name is Larry Fink. Larry Fink is the CEO of BlackRock. Who is BlackRock? Where did he come from? What do I mean by that? Well, BlackRock is the most powerful company, financial company, probably the most powerful company in the world right now. Why? Does anybody have an answer? This is how long this goes back. So there was a crisis in the 80s called the S&L crisis, savings and loan crisis, very similar to what took place in 2008. In fact, you might say it was the test run. And when it blew up, all of the savings and loans, and it was the largest, bankruptcies in history, and the whole thing was based on a criminal act of which 30,000 guys got flipped to basically send 1,000 executives to jail. That was the last time the government actually worked and put high financial crimes in prison. And as a result, we saw deregulation based on the influence of everybody in the finance over the course of the last 4 decades to make sure that government couldn't do its job. But in the aftermath of the S&L crisis, Larry Fink got put into position to clean it all up through what was known as the Resolution Trust. Then he created a company called BlackRock. Actually, I think at that time he was working for First Boston. He was heavily involved in mortgage-backed securities, which is go figure considering what we show you in the con. And then he created an incredible software that gave leverage and advantage to all of his clients and really everybody who got involved with him, which made him wildly successful. But in the aftermath of the 2008 great financial crisis, the government, meaning Timothy Geithner, put him as the point person to manage what was known as Maiden Lane. Maiden Lane came into being based on the Bear Stearns collapse, which preceded the Lehman Brothers collapse in 2008, of which he created in concert with the Federal Reserve, Ben Bernanke, that utilized Federal Reserve Act 13.3 to create exigent lending, emergency lending under exigent circumstances because they were trying to prevent contagion. Because they knew that all of the liar's loans that were going into the entire pipeline that led to derivatives were going to blow up the world. They tried to stop it. They started with Maiden Lane. One thing led to another. Lehman collapsed. The whole thing went down. And that's when John Paulson was talking to the 13 bankers about what he called the bazooka. And then not too much longer, Timothy Geithner, the former head of the Bank of New York Federal Reserve, who became the Secretary of Treasury under Obama, handpicked, of course, by the administration to clean up the mess that they were all a part of. And he was like a yes man, right? And he said famously, because he's such a fucking asshole, he said this out loud, that the American people were going to be foam on the runway for the crashing up the financial system. And what did that mean? John Paulson pulled out the bazooka, spent trillions upon trillions upon trillions of dollars, giving it to Wall Street to clean up their mess and to create liquidity in the system again, and then DOJ didn't prosecute. So I am trying to blast through your mind to deliver the truth that you've got to wrap your head around. We live in a corporate fascist state undergirded by a criminal syndicate, and if you're outraged by Alex Jones, if you're outraged by Trump, and both need to go down, you've got to be monumentally more outraged by everything that I'm telling you, because this system allowed those two assholes to become what they were. They had to fucking bury it and look for a scapegoat and all sorts of stuff to take your attention. Meanwhile, they've got all the power and all the control. You want to understand conspiracy? And by the way, if anybody from mainstream wants to try to plow me out there in the ethosphere and try to, make me out as somebody who's lying, bring it. I've already passed all of the sniff tests of like 3 different law firms that had to go through everything that we've presented with a fine-tooth comb before we could even go public with this stuff, because we lay out the criminality of Jamie Dimon, the CEO of Chase, who famously, and I really, really like Jon Stewart. Jon Stewart's done some fantastic heroic work with veterans in the last little while, but through his show, the problem with Jon Stewart, they interviewed Jamie Dimon, and they have no idea who they're interviewing. This is part and parcel of the madness of media. Jon Stewart is no more an investigative journalist, although much smarter, but he's no more an investigative journalist, quite frankly, than Alex Jones. Seriously, a comedian is not an investigative journalist, and neither is some fucking blowhard, okay? I became an investigative journalist because I spent tens of thousands of hours doing it, and I had to go through all of the processes to do it right. And I've got to tell you, man, after 13 years of that effort to get all of this information on my back, that proves that, not only did I mention Jamie Dimon, but Lloyd Blankfein at Goldman Sachs, and then, of course, Angelo Mazzillo at Countrywide, and Roland Arnold at AmeriQuest, and I could go on and on and on. But most importantly, Robert Rubin, who was the former CEO of Goldman Sachs turned Secretary of Treasury under the Clinton administration, who then became the chair of Citigroup, who then lied to the FCIC, that we've proved in the con that ultimately allowed Citi to get away with $3 trillion after burying millions of people in a $90 billion a year bullshit fraud pipeline that a guy in the con by the name of oh my God, I'll come back to in a minute, because he's Richard Bowen, one of my favorite heroes of all time and greatest people I've ever met, went the distance in heroism, and so did everybody in the con to blow this stuff up. And it's bulletproof. And so I'm taking on the world, because when you've got the truth, you're bulletproof. So if you stayed with me this long throughout this truth bomb, thank you. Because it's ridiculous what we're in the midst in, but I'm telling you the truth. The entire apparatus of media is fucking full of shit. And by the way, when you talk about, and I never finished this point, the man behind the curtain, which is Larry Fink. So they were there with Maiden Lane. They got there to fucking do the bazooka to basically choose who they were going to rescue in the aftermath of the 2008 great financial crisis, of which they became partners. That's why they became the most powerful company in the world. And they got their fingers in everything, including Netflix, of which Netflix passed on us being able to, put this truth out there. Look, man, it's the man behind the curtain. And I'm the guy that's going the distance to tell you the truth. And I'm trying to get millions of you to join me on the Washington Mall for the week starting November 1st in Washington, D.C. And we need tens of millions of you, because if we can get you there equipped with the truth that's in the con at www.thecon.tv, and all of the stuff that we put out there, both the new Untouchables, which is available, if you just do a Google search, it's fantastic, from the Real Progressives. That's another 30 hours of commentary and information that blows the shit wide open, including Alan Greenspan. And then ultimately, the Truth Bombs the Con on YouTube and everything that we do on TikTok. And, if I can get you as an army to get out of your fucking madness, don't buy motherfuckers like Alex Jones or Rachel Maddow or, Anderson Cooper, who's just an idiot, or, Tucker Carlson and then some. None of them have done it. My team and I are the only ones who have done it, and the only ones that will continue to do it. And we have to get the millions upon millions of victims that got fucking crushed by the courts, that foreclosed upon everybody illegally. They got to show up. I used to be of this mindset that protesting doesn't make sense. I mean, look at it. It moves the needle in a lot of ways, but we've got to elevate these truths above the madness. If you participated in Black Lives Matter, if you participated in Me Too, you got to come out of your silos and understand what we're talking about, which is the corruption that has got a stranglehold on everything. We need everybody in this country who's not a white supremacist getting played by billionaires to fight for liberty and justice for all. That's what I'm doing. That's what I'm putting forward, and I need you guys to help us. We need you to understand everything that we've put forward, and we need you to share, we need you to like, we need you to subscribe, and we need you to comment. We need you to join us. If we don't fucking pull this stuff off now, we only have ourselves to blame. Thank you for listening. All the best.